Hey YouTube, in this video I'm going to be talking about how to turn on the gluteal muscles. So this is your hips and your glutes. The reason you have to turn these on is because when you're sprinting, the main muscles you're supposed to be feeling and going tap with would be your hips and your glutes, and understanding how to turn them on so you can actually feel them out when you sprint is extremely important. We'll start off with the hips, purely because that's generally the easiest to turn on. And once you have your hips turned on, it's pretty easy to turn your glutes, purely because they're just in the same area, and when you move your hips, you're kind of firing the glutes, it's just being able to feel it. So, to turn your hips, there's many different ways. However, my favorite one is you get down into a lunge, kneel down, and you want your front leg to be, let me just back up here. And you want your front leg to be at a 90-degree angle to distance from your other leg. Well, at the knee joint, you want a 90-degree angle here, so that you have the right 90-degree angle also at your groin. Your back leg's not important. From there, you want to make sure 90 degrees, you're upright, and then it's really simple. You just lift up your leg. You lift up this front leg in front of you. You want to do both legs as well. It's impossible to lift up this front leg with your quads, which is why this movement is so important. Because if it's impossible to fire your quads in this position, then your body has to figure out what it can fire in this position to lift it up. And the only thing it can fire is the muscle right here, your hips. And you want to fire your hips and get them to lift up your leg, like that. Just like that. It's impossible for me to try and use my quads. In fact, in this position, if I was to try and use my quads, my leg's gonna want to straighten out. And that's by me purposely squeezing as hard as possible for an extended period of time. Does it go and straighten out? That wouldn't happen naturally. If I just try to squeeze my quad, nothing happens. No movement. No movement. But if I keep squeezing, my leg naturally wants to go out. And if I lift up my leg slightly with my hips, because I know how to fire my hips, and I let my leg move, it's just gonna want to squeeze. Straighten out the second I squeeze my quads. Instead, what we want to do is fire from the hips up. I want to try and get these squeezes. First of all, we want to start off by being able to hold a squeeze. You want to do an isometric. So you just want to lift up and hold. Lift up and hold. You're going to drift forwards. That's normal. That's normal. Don't try and hold for as long as you possibly can. Hold for as long as your body is willing to let you hold. So if you try and hold and you drift forwards, let it drop. If you try and hold and you're able to hold it without moving, that's great. That's actually the goal we want to be able to get to. Even if you go on to later stages, because it means you have the balance to be able to still be in a strong position whilst you're like this. And this is quite similar to how it would be when you're sprinting. When you're in this position or this position, which is why this movement is so important and so vital, because it allows you to mimic how you would be sprinting. And then from there, you want to be able to not just hold it, you also want to be able to fire as fast as possible. Once you figure out all of that, you've essentially turned on your hips. I would recommend you do 100 every day. This isn't really anything intense, anything complex either. So what you're able to luckily do is, you don't have to do it in sets of 10. You can do it in 5 sets of 20 instead, and you're going to see improvements. Though be warned, you will see DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. So when I had my first competition of the indoor season, I woke up on that day after a couple of days of doing this, 100 every day, and my back was destroyed. Muscular wise, it wasn't actually destroyed, and this is purely because of how much damage, well, not some damage I'd been doing, because my body wasn't used to using this muscle, but my body's strong, it's used to fatigue, so I was able to withstand it for a bit, but I didn't give myself a break, so delayed onset muscle soreness occurred, which resulted in me feeling pain, so I had to run through my indoor season with pain because of my hips, whilst also firing with my hips, which is a weird experience. But make sure you are prepared for the DOMs as they come, because I like to think of myself as a pretty strong athlete, and I still got it. And this is when I'm used to doing higher repetitions and stuff. So if I can still get it, there's a good chance you'll still get it, even if you are around my level, if you've never done it before. So it is worth noting that this is possible. Now I'm gonna switch to the next leg. And we're gonna switch from, actually no, we still got more. For the hips, there's something else you can do. This is why I brought the chair. It wasn't actually still on it. So you've got that move that I just showed, but there's more variations to it. Essentially the goal here is to isolate our muscles and make it harder for you to do the movement. So for example, at this height, it's really easy for me to fire my hips. Once you figure it out, it's great because you're also standing up, which is much similar to sprinting. So you're able to transfer what you've done there to here, but I still prefer that personally. But you're able to transfer what you've done into a sort of sprinting movement where I'm literally just moving my hips. You'll know if you're using your quads to lift your leg, because what will happen is your leg will straighten out, though it's kind of impossible in these positions. You're gonna lift up. And once that gets easy, you want to go from a lower level to a higher level, to as high as possible. Because the higher you get, more mobility you have. Obviously, you're not gonna try and be doing the splits with this movement, because when you're sprinting, you're not gonna be having that much mobility. But the higher you're able to get, the better it's going to be for you. And you wanna make sure your back leg stays straight. You don't want any limp like that, because that will show in your sprinting, which is just energy leakages, this back leg being bent. You want to make sure it's up straight and you just fire. And you just keep going higher until literally, when you try and squeeze your glutes, it's no longer that you can't squeeze the glutes, but you've gotten so high to the point where your hips, they just can't go up any higher without any increased mobility, or even if they did get increased in mobility, there's not much point. Other than that, you also have the glutes that you want to turn on, which does bring us back into this movement. This is my favorite one for trying to turn on your glutes. There is other stuff you can do as well. So you might think there's only one muscle you can turn on to lift up this leg, and that's your hips. And if you was to say that, you would be right, but you'd be wrong. Reason being is the glutes can also lift up this leg. However, it's not this glute on this leg you want to fire, it's this glute instead. So we want to make sure you're upright and everything, slightly forwards. Your leg is angled correct, then you want to squeeze the glute as hard as you possibly can. When you squeeze the glute and your leg is angled properly, however, it is worth noting, you can't have a complete 90 degrees, you're going to have to bring it in a bit. When you squeeze the glute, your body's going to go from this to this, and it's just going to go up. It's not going to go up by a lot, but it will go up. And when it goes up, you're going to feel slight tension in your hips, but not much. And if you're not trying to actively fire the hips, they're not really going to be the main firer in your leg. It's just going to be your glute. It is worth noting that if your leg angles are wrong, what's going to end up happening is, especially for this, your legs aren't going to go up. You're going to want them to, and you're going to be squeezing your glutes, but they're not going to go up. They're not going to go up purely because the angles is wrong, because your hip's not able to optimally fire at that. Also with your hip position, if you're upright completely, yeah, you can squeeze your glute, but this leg isn't going to go anywhere. But if you get that slight lean, your legs at the right degree, slightly in more than 90 degrees, you squeeze that glute, you want to fire it as fast as possible and let go. Quick fire. Whilst the glutes is one of the slowest twitch muscles, you can still fire it fast. So especially if you want to sprint fast, you're going to have to learn how to. So you just want to fire it. Well, actually, that was my hip. You want to fire it fast, and then watch your leg go. Then from there, if you want to figure out how to use your hips and your glutes while sprinting, well, it's simple. You mash the two together, and that would look like this. It really hurts because the floor is wood. This really hurts to do. Otherwise, I would have a better demonstration for all of those. But that is essentially how you turn on your hips, your glutes, your hips, and your glutes. And then obviously, whilst you're sprinting, you just practice. Like what I used to do when I was first figuring it out was I'd do this movement to warm up, and then I'd try and do it on a track. And then I'd record myself, or I'd ask my coach. If the recording was wrong, I wasn't landing underneath me, which is the goal of this, or coach said I wasn't, then I know what I needed to do. I just needed to go back down, repeat this, be like, okay, this is what I need to be moving like, and then go again. What I did though is I just focused on the hips. I didn't focus on the hips and the glutes, because you can figure out how to do the hips and the glutes, or the glutes specifically, quite easily once you figured out the hips. because to fire the glutes, you're gonna actively fire the hips slightly, which is why the leg that you do the kneeling lunge on does actually result in the leg moving up, because you're actually firing the hips. Otherwise, it'd literally be impossible for your hips, your leg to even lift up if your glutes weren't actively pulling on your hip. Other than that, there's another move you can do to turn on your glutes. And this one's a really simple one. And I also do this when I'm trying to go to training. So if I'm supposed to be going training or have a competition, I just do this. And that's walking. Just walk. And right before your leg comes off the ground, essentially, right when it gets under your central mass. So right when, let's say this is the leg that's walking, right when this leg gets here, you want to squeeze that glute, and then what's going to end up happening is you're just going to propel essentially forwards. And when you propel forwards, you're like, okay, I can feel this glute. Then relax and walk normally, and then feel it. Feel it. Just try and understand how walking feels with and without your glute, because you just walk usually, but you don't actually think about what goes into the movement whilst you're walking, because you're just walking essentially. Like, you've been doing it for however many years you've lived for, but you've probably been doing it wrong, because to walk properly you're supposed to actually use your glute. And you'll realize this is probably the right way to walk, because walking just becomes so much easier. Even if you take tiny steps, you just propel down the street wherever you're going essentially, which it's a great skill to have if you're always in rush hour and you don't want to ever be late. But other than that, it just essentially just teaches you the glute movement. And what's even better is once you get under your central mass, it completely mimics sprinting, just at a slower motion. So you're actually able to feel the glute contractions slowly as you go onwards and onwards. So you're like, okay, so this is how it's supposed to feel. However, it is worth noting, when you're sprinting, you literally just do tap them. So you squeeze the glute and the opposite hip, and then you flip. You just flip, essentially like that. And you want to get the timing perfectly. Before you even worry about the timing, making sure you actually feel these muscles is extremely important. If you like my video, like the video, let me know in the comments section below. Check the description, because anything I forget to say in the video, I always put in the description. And if you like my content, subscribe. Helps the channel out a lot. I post every 2 days at 1 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. If you don't know when that is, just hit the bell and then you'll be notified instantly.